Dr. Wolpe, thank you for coming back in the studio.
That's my great pleasure.
So I'm going to direct everybody. I'm going to link to our conversation about a year and a half ago. I'm also going to link again to some of the conversations that you've posted to YouTube's about ethics and biotech, because I think people should think through them. You're one of my favorite people, especially here in the Atlanta area, to get us to think. Like, I love how you do that. Think about this. That sounds like a good idea, and it may be, but the unintended consequence about whatever it is that we're talking about could be this. We should think about it. And the other thing that I love about you as a critical thinker is, whether it's nature or the universe or however you want to think about it, are there safeguards built in to keep us from exasperating something that we shouldn't exasperate? And I'll explain that more in the show notes, but I just thought you were great there. And then when I reached out to you and asked you if you would consider coming in, you said, sure, but my role's changed. I was like, no, please say it's not so. But it's just as interesting. And it's the new center that you're forming down at Emory. Can you tell us what that is?
Sure.
And why is the idea changing?
So I spent 16 years as director of the Center for Ethics at Emory. I'm a bioethicist. I do the ethics of medicine, biotech, neuroscience, AI. And and I've been doing that for 40 years. And
can I interrupt you for a second? That's gross, because you look so good, and you've been doing this for a while. I think it's a vulgar display of power, if I'm honest. That's so awesome.
Ethics keeps you young.
I'm sorry, continue.
So I had always said that nobody should direct anything for more than a decade, and I was already way over my own standard. So I decided to step down, and to my surprise, the university said to me, would you build something else for us? And I said, what did you have in mind? And they said, we think you're a builder, so you go decide and you tell us, and you can build whatever you want here. So I went and thought about it, and I came back and I said, I'd like to build a new center for the university that's focused on conflict resolution, conflict transformation, peace building, mediation, and civic dialogue. And that was my original idea. And there were two important reasons why I wanted to do that. And I call them a micro and a macro reason. And the micro reason was, I've been teaching for 40 years, and I've watched students over those 40 years. And students have become progressively less able to talk to each other about tough issues. And today, whether you're talking about issues like gender or race, or whether you're talking about political issues on a national or a local level, or if you're talking, Israel-Gaza or right-left politics, students have a very hard time with ideological opponents sitting down and really having meaningful and deep conversations that don't devolve into argument or even a willingness to talk about them at all. A lot of people flee those conversations. And I deeply believe that part of our responsibility as educators is not just to teach students how to read and write, but how to have those kinds of conversations. Because really, at the end of the day, they're not only important for their occupations, they're important for their social life and their personal lives as well.
Yeah.
And then the macro reason was I just spent 14 weeks in Europe. And if I said to you, Dave, I'm going to Europe and I'm going to visit those cities known for conflict transformation and peace building, where do you think I'm going? Most people could come up with some of them. Geneva, Zurich, The Hague, Oslo, Helsinki, these cities are all over Europe.
Right.
But if I was sitting with you in a cafe in Paris and we were both Frenchmen, and I said to you, I'm going to the U.S. to go to the cities renowned for conflict resolution, peace building, where do you think I'm going? The answer is nowhere.
Right.
We do not have a single city in this country that is recognized as being a city for peace and mediation. And they're all over Europe. And so I want to make Atlanta that city. It's the story Atlanta tells about itself, even though it tells it in terms of civil and human rights and Martin Luther King.
Right.
It's really a story of conflict resolution and peace building.
Yeah.
Structurally, we've got the busiest airport in the world. We're an incredibly international and diverse city. We're the only city in the world with 2 Nobel Peace Prize winning centers, the Carter Center and the King Center. Our iconic center is supposed to be our Center for Civil and Human Rights. Andrew Young is trying to build a Center for Peace and Reconciliation. it really is a lot of what Atlanta is about. And so that's why I'm trying to build this center at Emory, and I hope it is a catalyst for Atlanta to become that.
Is there anywhere in the States at any time in our history? I imagine, and probably only because it's a good marketing tagline, that once upon a time it was Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. Not great bell maintenance, but brotherly love. But I don't even know if that's true. That was what I learned in 7th grade.
Well, the vision of this country was a vision of religious freedom. And if you think about where conflict happened in those days, it was almost always around religion. Religion is why the Pilgrims fled England.
Right.
Religious persecution. And we had mixed results in this country, but at least we tried to dedicate ourselves to that. And so I think that the country is founded on a vision like that. But I don't think they thought about it in terms of, peace and reconciliation. That wasn't the sort of frame that they put it under. That's a more modern frame.
Right. Do you think in Europe, the opportunities there, at least in Western culture, because you have a nation, not just people or, humans, but you have these nations or tribes or whatever. Like I was reading something the other day, really was fascinating piece of information. And it was when Martin Luther said to the Roman Catholic Church at the time, one of the most, if not the most powerful, certainly in the West, entity, said, hey, I disagree, and here's where my disagreements are. And the power, this is not to pick on the Roman Catholic Church, but the political branch of that said, we have a disagreement. But the 15 German princes of that era said, well, there's nothing you can do about it. We're going to protect this citizen and this idea. And so you would have conflicts over the millennia, at least in the Western civilization tradition. And so at times Rome was a center, or London, or they'd go find a common ground in The Hague or something, right? We're looking for, because there is simmering conflict, if not on the border, just a border away, Eastern Europe, Western Europe. Is that why they have that tradition?
I don't really know why. My speculation is, Europe is unique. It's a bunch of small countries clustered very close together. There are a lot of subgroups in Europe. And, they fought each other all the time throughout history. And I think finally, as we move into the modern era, Europe began to realize that the only way they were going to move forward, and superpowers began to emerge, was by stopping their kind of internecine fighting. They had to find a way to reach some compromises with each other. And I think that kind of idea of compromise and letting people exist even across ideological difference just arose kind of organically there. And there are a lot of micro examples. I'll give you one that I thought was really fascinating. So I spent time in the Netherlands, and 25% of the Netherlands is below sea level. Part of it's 20, 25 feet below sea level. So the single biggest threat to the Netherlands is a breach of the dikes.
Right.
So Netherlands has some political infighting that happens there. But they realized that the single unifying problem they all had was water control. That if they didn't handle water, it didn't matter if there were 3 political parties or 10, they'd all be dead.
Right.
So they created an independent water board that is beyond politics. And none of the politicians mess with the water board because they know that's instant political suicide. Because this is about survival. This isn't about, political difference.
Right.
And the people of the Netherlands think of that example as the kind of paradigmatic example of who they are as people. That we got together and we all agreed we were going to do this because it was important for our community. And this idea of compromise and this idea of cooperation, they said, then pervades. They think of it as a kind of example of how they think about the world and how they try to compromise with each other. And there are a lot of little examples like that around Europe. So I don't really know the reason why there are 15 cities or however many there are in Europe that think of themselves as cities that do conflict transformation and peace building, and there's the Oslo Accords and the Helsinki Accords, and there's Geneva and The Hague and Zurich and Basel
Right.
and Rome. I mean, these are all well-known places that people go when they're in conflict, and it has become one of these self-identifying qualities of being a European in the mind of Europeans.
Do you think, I find them fascinating, in some ways exact same, and in other ways completely different. I remember during, just after COVID, I was talking to some fiber providers, some what we call carriers in my business, international carriers, and they were from Sweden. And they never did a lockdown in Sweden.
Right.
And they now, one of the things I really dug about them was they were not trying to proselytize. This is how for you and your community you should do it. What they said was for us and our community and the way that our social network works and restaurants and all these other things, this is a way that made sense for us, and here we go. And I don't know the statistics on whether that was more or less successful. But it was, on the one hand, we really believe we're part of the European community. And on the other hand, we're very Swedish.
Right.
And that tension is really interesting. I mentioned this is the other thing I love about it. I mentioned it to one of my Finnish friends. They're like, "What can you expect? They're Swedes," and I just could not stop laughing, like that sarcastic.
Right.
But I'm wondering where you started this conversation about the macro and the micro. In the micro, when you talk about your personal experience at university at Emory. Do you imagine, or in your travels with professors in Europe, are their students better adjusted to conflict resolution, or is it similar? Is this a worldwide phenomenon?
So I do actually think that their students are better. Most of the universities in Europe that I visited had programs to help students think through how you mediate, how you have tough conversations, how you negotiate differences. These were part of the university curriculum. They're not in general here in the United States. It's part of why I want to build this center. I think they should be. I think it's a really important skill, not only for people's professional lives, but for our personal and social lives as well. And I also think it's really important because of the particular place the United States is in right now, where we think of ourselves as polarized, we think of ourselves as fractured, we think of ourselves as split into factions that have a lot of trouble understanding each other and are suspicious of each other.
Right.
And yet when you really bring people together and have them talk about these things, you find that there isn't nearly as much difference as we pretend there is. And the value set that people come from on both sides are really very compatible.
Obviously, you're not speaking about the SEC, because that is a completely that's one of the few areas that I can get people here in the South to argue as much as any of that. So when you brought this idea to Emory, before we dive into technology, which I want to, you both felt like this is the natural momentum of starting off in biotech and ethical use of biotech or whatever. Is this a branch of that? Is this a completely unique and distinct thing? How do you think through it?
So a lot of people think I've just taken a right turn out of my career into something else, but it's makes a lot of sense to me. Not so much on the biotech and tech side, though I think there is an overlap there too. But part of what we do in bioethics, so they're clinical bioethicists. They work in hospitals and places when there are ethical issues, and they help people negotiate those issues. And I've worked as a clinical bioethicist. And that ends up being just mediation. I mean, it's really about the doctors are fighting with the nurses, or the family's fighting with the healthcare team. So, and the ethicist comes in, and I like to joke, I used to train hospital ethics committees, and I say, you'll be lucky if 25% of the time it's really about ethics. What you're going to find out is it is about how do we bring people together who are fighting over things, and usually what they say they're fighting about isn't really what they're fighting about. That is it's kind of like the presenting symptom and the underlying illness.
Right.
So they'll be arguing about something the doctor did this, or they gave, they said this, whatever that they say, when really it's about something deeper. It's about the way they were treated. It's about their fear. It's about their feelings of helplessness or hopelessness.
Mm-hmm.
And when you work through those things, then often the sort of presenting problem goes away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true in general. I mean, I think a lot of people operate out of some set of hidden emotions. You often fear, not always fear, and that part of what having a really productive conversation across differences is being able to manifest those emotions rather than pretending that the whole conversation is about some set of intellectual principles.
Right. Yeah. You know where that hits so home is I think I am arguing out of some set of intellectual principles all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife calls me out on it and sees through it.
Yeah.
And when I choose to be honest with myself, which is not always, the overwhelming majority of the time, her intuition is right. I don't know that it's right in all areas of life, but she has studied me or avoided me or been subjected to me for about 38 years. And, but even then in that intimate relationship, I'm her guy, she's my girl, we certainly could sometimes use conflict transformation. I'm wondering, you've been married for a while. You've been with your bride for a long time.
40 years.
40, there you go. Again, I think throwing a little shade at the rest of us, just trying to figure it out. But, and you've been in your clinical discipline for a long time. It doesn't feel like it's an easy... And why conflict transfer? Now, I know you explained the micro and the macro, but like this would seem like it would be the time to just relax. Well, it's a problem for other people to solve.
So let me tell you, say what I'm doing in a slightly different way.
Okay.
So I spent 40 years in ethics, 40 years as a bioethicist. I loved every minute of it. Mm-hmm. When I decided to step down from the center, I kind of decided that was the sun setting on that career. Mm-hmm. I still do some ethics. I'm still part of that community. I still go to meetings and things like that. But I closed down I was a very active doing research and writing papers and going to meetings and being a very active part. Mm-hmm. I closed all that down. I said, 40 years is enough.
Right.
And I see what I'm doing now as different. Mm-hmm. This is a coda on my career. Mm-hmm. And I think of myself as doing this as a service, not so much as a personal career. Mm-hmm. I think this is really important. Mm-hmm. I think it's what we need right now. I think our inability to talk to each other, I think our incredible sense of polarization in this country and interpersonally, I think our inability to understand the other side and what the other side really believes and to stop caricaturing the other side, which both sides do, is absolutely crucial if this country is going to move forward together in any kind of unity.
Yeah.
And so I see this center that I'm trying to build as a bit of a sacred mission. I think it's really important. It's not just something I think is needed. I think it's deeper for me than that.
Yeah.
And it's also not my field. My field is ethics, not conflict transformation. And so I come to it as a naif. That is, I can walk into these meetings. I had over 30 meetings in Europe and conflict resolution centers all over Europe over the last 4 or 5 months. And I could walk in the room and ask stupid questions and really try to get to the basis of things because I came in with enough gravitas as an academic expert in something that they took me very seriously as a colleague, but I also didn't know anything about this field. So I could come in and they could teach me, and everyone likes to teach.
Yeah.
So this has been a lot of fun for me to learn a new field at this point in my career. But also, all of those conversations only reinforce for me how important this is right now. And as I tell people what I'm doing, and as people read my blog about it and write to me and things, more I'm getting reinforced by people saying, oh my God, we need this so much right now. This is exactly the right time. And then in Atlanta, I see with a lot of movement towards the desire for Atlanta to do this kind of work. It's cropping up in a lot of different places. In the arts community, there's a lot of this work happening in the arts community, in the political community. It feels to me like there is a kind of critical mass right now for this kind of approach.
I'm curious, when you went home and started to talk to your wife about this, other than did she go with you on any of your trips to Europe?
Yes, she went with me for the whole way through Europe.
So that probably was, this could be interesting. And I've got to go to your blog, and you are an amazing writer.
Oh, thanks.
The pictures that you took are incredible, in particular the Northern Lights and the trip up to Norway and those islands. Like, I lost some percentage of my life just rooting through that. But did she think you were crazy? She's like, Paul, what are you doing?
At the very beginning, she absolutely did.
She had conflict. I don't want to solve this problem.
I could have retired.
Yeah.
I saw it as an opportunity also for us. I think it took her a little while to see it as that. I knew it's the first year. So I'm on sabbatical this year, and I'm using that sabbatical to travel all around the world and visit places that do conflict resolution. And when I first started negotiating with the university, I said, I need a travel budget, and it has to be generous. And what I was thinking of at the time was traveling around the world like that and going to these places, but also doing it with my wife and seeing it as an opportunity for us to go to some places we hadn't been able to go to before. So I had this whole plan in my mind. It took a little while for her to get all that. But I think she's really on board now. We had just really some very interesting and wonderful experiences in Europe. And I'm going to be traveling. We're going to be traveling to Japan. She's not going to go on all the trips with me. I'm going to South Africa, Botswana, and Rwanda. I don't think she's going to come on that one. And then I'm also going to the Middle East. Not exactly sure when. I want things to calm down a little bit, but I'm going to at least Lebanon, Israel, and Egypt, and maybe other places too. And I don't know if she's going to go on that one either. But the point is, I saw this as both an opportunity. When you go to a place and you're talking about conflict resolution and peace building, you see the place differently than if you're going there as a tourist.
Yeah.
Because no place doesn't have conflict.
Right.
And when you talk to people about the conflicts of their place, it almost, by definition, gets at some of the root issues of that place, some of the value conflicts of that place, what people really care about. People fight over the things they care about.
Yeah.
And so you see and you experience and you hear about the countries differently when you are asking about those kinds of things than when someone sort of says, and here's the history of Ireland, or whatever it is.
And there's not a filter, if so many times, at least in my personal experience, there's a variety of just, even though I've lived in the States and traveled, I've only been to Europe once. But even here in the States, I've lived in border communities or near border communities, certainly knew people from border communities. I've been on the West Coast, Texas, here in the Southeast. And you have, I don't care who your source of the news is, but you have that at least anecdotal information, one level away, as opposed to the reality of meeting people that might be talked about in the news, but what you find in almost every circumstance, the normal range is not at all what was expressed, or at least that's my personal experience. And holy cow, there's so much that I have in common. There's so many hopes and dreams that we imagine. The characterization that I've allowed myself to think of, whatever the group of people, sexuality difference, whatever, is not. There are reasons for cliches for sure, but overwhelmingly, it has, to my embarrassment, I bought more into the myth. Either I don't think I've ever had, I guess what I'm trying to say, a circumstance where the reality was anywhere near as bad as what I had imagined or been led to believe, no matter what the motive of the other group was. And so when you get to remove the layer and you get to meet people for real, you at least get closer to the source of truth.
Well, the fundamental truth is that you never, ever know people until you actually interact with them.
Yeah.
That all, stereotypes, of course, have a grain of truth, but it's only ever a grain. And if you think you know some group or some people because you've read about them, you don't.
Right.
And that's why it's so important when you talk about ideological fights to sit down with the people who are on the other side, not assume that you understand their motives, not assume that you understand even their rationale, because usually you've got it wrong. One of the more interesting experiences I had in Europe was talking with a group in Zurich at a university called ETH. They have a subgroup called Dealing with the Past. And that's the name of the group. And what the group does is, after the acute fight, whatever it is over, the hostilities are over, now you've got two, sometimes more than two sides, and they want to move forward in this country, whatever country it is. And they both have narratives about the other side, usually pretty terrible ones. Each side demonizes the other. And what Dealing with the Past tries to do is how do we get them to change their story about each other? How do we rewrite the story? Not forgetting the past, not glossing over what happened. Part of it is you have to be really honest and true about what happened. But how do we then move forward past that? And what's so interesting, and one of the things that I find fascinating about this pursuit, is sometimes it works. Sometimes you can get it to work really well, like in Rwanda, where the two sides really are working together to try to build a community. Sometimes it's sort of in the middle. It's working, but it's not really working. That's like South Africa. And sometimes it's not there at all. And the great example of that that I saw, one of the most fascinating places I went in those 14 weeks, was Belfast. Because what happened in Belfast? So for 30 years, there was terrible destruction, over 3,500 people killed, over 40,000 injuries, bombing of grocery stores, children being killed. It was horrific. Then the Good Friday Accords come, 98, 99. And now for 25 years, there hasn't been bombings or killings across these two communities. There have been some internal, it's a different story, but not that many. And yet, 25 years later, the two sides aren't really 1 inch closer together than they were before. They still sit in their separate camps. They still demonize the other side. The Good Friday Accord said that one of the goals of the Good Friday Accord was to create integrated schools all over Northern Ireland. Only 7% of the schools are integrated 25 years later. There were gates and fences between Catholic and Protestant neighborhoods. Good Friday Accord said they should come down. Most of them are still up. So the point I'm making is, here you have three examples of three countries, one of which has integrated itself really well. Another one is still struggling, and the other one hasn't really tried. I mean, there are a lot of people in Northern Ireland who are trying, but as a nation, it hasn't really managed to try that. And so one of the fundamental deep questions is how do we create a shared humanity in places where there's a history or where there's a religious ideology or a political ideology that is still conspiring to divide. And it really takes a powerful act of will. It takes the people on the ground who are working in Northern Ireland, for example, trying to bring the two sides together are really heroes. But those narratives that we tell ourselves about the other side are very powerful.
Yeah. Well, I could stay in the philosophical all day, but I want to shift us a little bit.
Sure.
One of the things that data centers do, our primary function is we're centers of data. And my audience has heard me many times talk about, I argue the ideas of the whole world live in a data center. If they live on the internet, they live in somebody's data center. Emory's, mine, Amazon's, somebody's. So when you're doing your flight itinerary or posting your blog posts or where to the cloud or whatever, it's going into a data center. And one of the things that's in the news, besides data centers a lot, is this idea of AI and technology. And I think in some ways, these tools have rightly earned an area of concern. I think these tools are morally neutral, but they can be used to amplify good or negative. As I'm thinking about a little bit of what you've shared with us today, what I'm wondering is how, whether it's AI specifically or machine learning or any of these tools, how can we amplify them to help mediators mediate, whether it's to make them more aware of the person in front of me? Is the person in front of me actually calm? Or are they just looking calm? Are they actually believe they're being truthful? Or is it, whatever? How do you imagine we could start, and neither one of us are an expert in this area, we're just sort of thinking out loud, but how would you imagine something like that being applied, or could it be applied?
Yeah. I think there are a lot of different ways that you could use AI in conflict resolution on both a sort of more macro and a more micro scale. So if you've got two parties that are in some kind of a conflict, they often have a lot of data to bring and a lot of history to talk about and a lot of facts that they want to tell you about why the other side has harmed them or what. And a lot of that can be processed quickly by AI and be factually checked and be synopsized and be churned through by AI in ways that can provide insights that aren't necessarily readily apparent to human beings.
Right.
AI using NLP, natural language processing, can analyze the way in which people speak, can look for patterns, can see what we think of in poker as tells that a good mediator can use to try to help facilitate the conversation. Give real-time feedback about what's happening there to see, for example, impediments that are stopping the conversation from going forward, or repetitive patterns that seem to be looping, because that's one of the things that happens, and a skilled mediator looks out for it, is that parties often have very well-rehearsed tropes that they use to tell what happened. And what happens is one side gives its side and the other side gives its side, and then they go into the spiral that they've done 1,000 times, telling the stories and refuting your story, and then you refute my refutation. It goes on and on.
Right.
And a really skilled mediator can see that coming, but AI in analyzing patterns can often suggest ways to get around that or see that pattern when it's beginning to develop more quickly than a human mediator might be able to see it, and identify triggers that, I've analyzed thousands of hours, I being AI, have analyzed thousands of hours of discussion. And you know what? Whenever this kind of thing happens, that's a trigger. So human beings can do that too, but I think AI as a tool might be able to do it in ways that are either much more subtle than humans can pick up, or, of course, they can do these enormous data sets and see things that would take humans much longer to bring out. So I don't think AI has been used extensively for these purposes yet, but I think there's real potential there.
While you were talking, I keep saying this word, and I hadn't thought about it this way until just listening to you. For some reason in my mind, when I thought mediator, I thought attorney. But the more I think about it, I don't know if you have to be an attorney, but plenty of times I have personal experience with lawyers that they're not particularly interested in a mediation. Mm-hmm. They're either interested in winning, like why wouldn't you? You've been employed to win something, and or continue the conflict because, and I'm not trying to demonize attorneys, but if I can continue the conflict, I can continue to get paid. Like why wouldn't I want that? Whereas a mediator is looking for how do I reach a mediation that is, whether it's imperfect or whatever, but we have resolved, or if resolution isn't the right word, we've reached an accord, temporary or long-lasting, that that we can live with, whatever it is. Is that a right way to think of that?
No, it's not actually. I just spoke to the Atlanta International Arbitration Society. Okay. It's all lawyers, and they're arbitrators.
Right.
So what's the difference between arbitration and mediation? So what arbitration is you and I have companies and we're fighting each other.
Right.
And we say, I could sue you and we go to court and that will take 5 years and cost us both $25 million. Or you and I can agree to hire an arbitrator. And when we hire an arbitrator, we agree to abide by that arbitrator's decision. Okay. You give your best case, I give my best case, and the arbitrator will then make a decision, and we sign something that says we'll agree to it.
Right.
Mediation is not that.
Okay.
Mediation is not we agree to do whatever the mediator says.
Okay.
The mediator is just there to facilitate our conversation. So there are a lot of arbitration services. Courts often will say to warring parties, use arbitration. And lots of lawyers are professional, actually have arbitration companies or do arbitration or court-ordered arbitration or mediation.
Right.
So, yeah, when you're talking about a lawyer, we're talking about your lawyer or my lawyer, their job is to defend me.
Right.
But a lot of lawyers and ex-judges, by the way, too, and even sitting judges, also have a side job being arbitrators for those kinds of things. Okay. Mediation is different in that nobody has to listen to the mediator. The mediator is his or her job is not to listen to the two sides and sit in judgment. Mm. His or her job is to help the two sides talk to each other. Mm. So, and some lawyers do that, but mediators are often not lawyers. And in fact, when there's court-ordered mediation, very often non-lawyer mediators do that kind of work.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's a way, not just in the accuracy of data or in the claim, if there's a way to leverage tools, whether it's a wearable or it's a thing in the ear or just something in the room that will help us, the emotion of the other person or just the stress level. Is this person, am I dealing with a calm person or not calm person? And why I think that's important, not just for the obvious, but if at least in America, mediation, or at least the desire to mediate, is less common. And we want to, I would imagine we want to attract people to this idea. You should want mediation.
Yeah.
Understand and be understood and reach a go-forward conflict that in the end, the ROI for you and your family or your interests is better. I know that there's, a Hatfield McCoy situation, whatever. I don't care over my dead body. We will never. Well, that I'm sure there are those circumstances. I've yet to experience something like that. But if your idea is for human flourishing, that's probably not going to lead ultimately to you and your immediate. But also to help people just develop the skills, like to leverage these tools to help me sooner rather than later to develop the skills to be a good mediator.
So there was a lot in that question.
Yeah.
So let me unpack a few of the things.
Sorry about that.
No, that's all right. First of all, AI. I think AI can be a tool to help train mediation, but also a tool for a mediator.
Okay.
So what is AI particularly great at? Taking lots and lots and lots of data and seeing patterns.
Right.
So if you think of some AI platform examining thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of parties in some kind of negotiation, mediation, or arbitration. Could AI begin to understand at a very deep level the nature of vocal tone and what that vocal tone is implying, or body language, or certain kinds of phrases, or the use of aggressive language or passive language? That is, I would love to see if we could get AI to unpack human communication that way and have insights into how people in conflict communicate. And so I think we're just at the very beginning of the possibility of that process. But on another thing that you said, look, who would have ever guessed that we would end up being close allies of Germany and Japan after World War II?
Yeah.
Right? Or that Jews and Israelis are moving to Berlin.
Right.
I mean, or, the truth is human beings have an enormous capacity to go beyond conflict.
Yeah.
Traditional enemies become friends, and that's true on the individual level as true as it is on the international level. And the question is, how does that happen? What is the dynamic that leads people that loathed each other
Right.
to get past that?
Right.
And I think that is the basic human insight that peace building is trying to understand and that conflict is trying to understand. And could AI eventually help us understand those dynamics? I don't see why not.
Yeah. In your sabbatical, and as you went to institutions that both have a history and an interest in peacemaking and resolution, and those that hope to continue that, are they wary of where these tools might come in, that maybe there's hype or maybe it's not going to help them? And where I might be wary, with no experience in mediation, is I was telling you off air, when I was a kid, 19 years old, maybe it was 20 years old, I forget, I had this crummy little Chevrolet Chevette car. I did not have a floorboard in the passenger side, which I didn't think it was a big deal. I had a piece of wood and a mat over it until my then girlfriend, now wife, got in and said, "What's going on with this?" I was like, "Come on." But I jumped out of airplanes for a living back then, so it was no big deal. And I just got out a map. I knew I needed to get to Interstate 20 and go west until I got to the coast and then head north up to Santa Maria, where my parents then lived. And when I look at my children, or even me, and I have relied so much on GPS now that it's not quite as bad when it stops working, that I don't have a sense of direction or north, east, south, and west, but it's nowhere near. And it's not just cognitive decline as I've gotten older. My intuition at 16 or 15 or 18 learning to drive all over the west coast of California, and that tool where I didn't have to think as hard because it stood in the place, I'm wondering to what degree we're going to be disciplined about letting this help us versus make us weaker.
So here's a truism of humans and tools. Every single new tool impoverishes human beings and enhances human beings.
Okay.
So when books first came in, there were lots of figures, especially religious figures and monks, who were opposed to books.
Really?
Completely. I mean, first of all, there was the idea that only the elite should have books, but not just to try to monopolize information, which is how we cynically think about it today, but also because they believed they were the only ones responsible to use books. Because if you had books, then you didn't have to exercise your mind to remember things. And so it impoverished people. I don't know if you remember Roots, but the whole premise of Roots was that these tribal storytellers could tell hours and hours and hundreds of generations of their history they had memorized, right?
Yeah.
We don't need to do that if you have books, right? So this had perhaps impoverished human memory. And we could go on and on with examples of that. In medicine, the field that I've spent my career in, if you think about how did doctors listen to hearts, 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. They put their ear on the chest
Yeah.
of the person. Think of the intimacy of that action. A hand on the back, the ear on the chest,
Yeah.
and then then they would use a horn, but still the horn would be on the, because a horn magnifies,
Right.
so be on the chest and their ear would be on the other side.
Right.
They're still, and then you get to stethoscope, and then finally you get to something like EKG.
Right.
Each one is a step removing the physician further and further from the patient. That's an impoverishment of the relationship between the patient and the physician.
Yeah.
So over and over again, technology moves us away from things that at that time we think are important. The question is, how do we use technology correctly as a tool without that and minimize that impoverishment? And even more, we don't now think of books as constituting a loss. Quite the contrary.
Right.
Now we're worried about books,
Yeah.
right? How do we differentiate what is just sort of a true human quality that it would be a great tragedy for humans to lose versus something that we're just attached to and don't realize that it's not crucial?
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I knew 50 phone numbers by heart.
Oh, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My kids don't know my phone number. Because they never...
You're a papa or a dad in the
Right,
device.
whatever. That's all they
Yeah.
need to know. And it's the same with GPS.
Yeah.
When I first moved to Atlanta, I'm from Philadelphia.
Uh-huh.
And Philadelphia's built on a grid.
Right.
Right? You don't need a map to know how to get
Right.
to third
And
and
probably you don't have 7 streets with the same name.
Right, exactly. And when I first got to Atlanta, whose streets looked like someone dropped spaghetti and just named them, I called my wife because my first year here I commuted and she stayed in Philly because my younger daughter was a senior in high school. And I said to her, I just want you to know, honey, that there is a woman here who I have become completely enslaved to and who I do anything she tells me to do. She lives in my dashboard because without GPS,
Yeah.
I don't know how anyone ever got around this city.
Yeah.
So is that a good? On the other hand, maybe it took me longer. You know, I can now drive all around without the GPS. I
Right.
know the city, or at least my part of the
Right.
city. Would I have gotten to know the city faster if I had had to use a map? I think I would have,
Right.
because you can't be pulling maps out all the time. So you force yourself to learn. While GPS, you can be lazy and just do what it says.
Yeah.
Is that a bad thing? I mean, is that in somehow a negative? I don't really know.
I think if we're aware of it and we're aware of where it brings, the less you use a muscle, whatever that muscle is, or at least that memory of doing something, certainly there is an impact.
One of the problems with modern technology, and this wasn't true for most of human history, but it's true in the second half of the 20th and 21st century, is we think of technology as truer than non-technology.
That's true.
And there are many examples of that. One that I dealt with for a while, one of my areas of expertise is the ethics of neuroscience. And for a while we were dealing with this phenomenon where there would be some sort of trial that involved the brain, some claim about the brain, this person was incompetent and it wasn't their fault or whatever it might be. And so psychiatrists would be called to testify for whatever reason. And what I began to, and I had an appointment in psychiatry, and what I began to hear over and over again from psychiatrists was, I could go up there, me with my 40 years of psychiatric experience, me as an internationally recognized expert in this thing, and I could say definitively that whatever is true. And then the other side would call someone up and they'd pull up a brain scan and everyone would believe the brain scan, even though they had no idea what that brain... It's just the fact that the guy is holding a picture of the brain
Right.
is all it took for them to disregard. So what did I do? I started bringing a picture of the brain because unless you're holding up a scan, they don't believe you, even though the scan has nothing to do with what we're arguing about.
Right.
And so psychiatrists would everybody brought a brain scan
Right.
when they began to why? Because the jury saw a scan.
Right.
So a scan must be true, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the lure of technology. It seems to be truer than human beings. We know human beings are flawed, but we think technology isn't. We think technology represents truth to the degree at least that it can.
Yeah.
And what's so different about AI is that AI lies, right?
Right.
In a way different than technology lied before. Like in that brain scan, the scan may not show what the psychiatrist says it shows, but that's the psychiatrist
Right.
misrepresenting. The scan is the scan. Now, for the first time, AI itself, the technology itself, lies to us.
In what way? What do you mean?
Well, that's what a hallucination is,
Oh, I see.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, so I asked. My last name is Wolpe. There's only one family of Wolpes in the world.
Okay.
So I asked AI, give me a history of the Wolpe family and make sure you include, and then I gave the names. I have a handful of relatives that are famous. One of my relatives was a congressman. One of my relatives is a very famous psychologist who invented a technique that people in psychology know about. So I mentioned the 3 or 4 that I knew AI would be able to find in the news, right? I said in one paragraph, give me a history and make sure you mention these people. I'm not kidding when I say every single sentence was wrong. Every single sentence. It said that my brother was my father. It said that my father was my other brother's son. It described the career of one of my relatives and credited to a completely different. I mean, I went through, there was not a single sentence in that paragraph that was 100% correct. Now, AI doesn't intentionally lie to you.
Right.
It's not, malicious or malevolent.
Right.
But if we think of the messages that we're getting from AI as uniquely true, then it also has a unique capability of leading us astray because it's not always true.
Yeah.
And we tend to trust technology in that way, even though we say we don't. And I think that's very, very worrisome.
Yeah. I love to use these large language models. I use them all the time, but where I use them is in my area of expertise.
Yeah.
I use them when they transcribe something for me because I was at the event or whatever, and then I listen to it again. I don't want to type up an hour conversation. It does it, but I listen to it quickly, and I'm kind of scanning. And if it gets big ideas, not necessarily a couple of the small commas or whatever, well, I can fix it. Not only am I listening to it, if it said, Dr. Wolpe said something that I was there. And not only that, why would he be commenting about changing your oil?
Right.
He's in this area, like that one. And so I'm able to fix the hallucination. And I don't think my transcription tool is trying to deceive me. It's like a golden retriever puppy. I threw a stick. Its number one motive is not to bring me back the stick that I threw, although it will if it can find it. It's to bring me back a stick.
Right.
It refuses, whereas a well-trained hunting animal will come back with nothing. If it can't find the thing it was trained on, it said, look, I don't know where you threw it. That's on you. I'm telling you, in the normal search patterns, I can't find it. You need to go somewhere else. What I'm wondering as it relates to mediation and peace, how do we make sure these tools are leveraged not to deceive, or almost like the deep fake? Like on the one hand, people in networking are super excited because the white hats trying to defend against the black hats are saying we're using AI to predict the attacks, or certainly to mitigate an attack as it's happening, but even better to prevent it before it happens. We love AI in our infrastructure because I can use AI tools that are listening to harmonics that a human can't hear and say, hey, that fan that you can't tell is starting to harmonize in a way that's not healthy. And we know because we've listened to 10 million fans in the past. You need to investigate this further before even the sensors in the machine can detect that a ball bearing or oil or something. And so we don't want to lose that potential. But I also don't want it to be leveraged against me to be deceptive. How do you build those tools to help you?
It can't. I mean, it's going to be leveraged against you. That is why in all of these kinds of technologies, you build measures and countermeasures. You build protective measures, right? I mean, think of cybersecurity, right? The more sophisticated our computer systems get, the more people try to hack them, the more we try to create countermeasures to hacking, the more they create countermeasures to our countermeasures, and on forever.
Right.
AI is not going to be made infallible. AI is not going to be made so that it cannot be used against you by a malevolent other human being.
Right.
Like all other technologies, we're going to have to learn how to use it defensively and well. We're going to learn what misuse of it looks like and find ways to defend ourselves against it. That's the way it's going to go. My concern is that the consequences and the depth and degree to which AI can be a problem, in which AI can deceive us, in which AI can cause harm and damage, I think is very great.
Mm-hmm.
And so a level of vigilance is really, really important here because the capacity for damage is so high.
Do people in your, I know I'm looking at the time, I
Yeah.
know we need to get on the road, and I'm going to do that in just a second. As you're building out your center,
Mm-hmm.
and you're talking to people around the world, you spend a lot of time in Europe, you're about to go to other places.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to read about your trip to Lebanon, Egypt, and Israel.
Yeah.
I'll bet you, I am certain there will be things, aha moments, that are going to shock us. I just believe that to be true. But as you talk to your colleagues, are they, AI is not going away. We're going to have to leverage it
Mm-hmm.
in one way or the other. Are they embracing? Are they enthusiastic to get these things? And then the second is, what's next up for you in the center?
Yeah. So I think they are. It's a tool, and everybody, again, we are so early in the AI world.
Yeah.
I mean, we're 10 minutes into AI,
Right.
historically speaking. So nobody knows the right way to use it yet.
Right.
Everybody's experimenting. There'll be successes and failures. There'll be tragedies and triumphs.
Right.
And we're going to grow with AI over the rest of human history,
Yeah.
and hopefully learn ways to use it that are really productive. I am early in building this center. I'm trying very hard to stay agnostic about exactly what this center is going to look like, because part of why I'm traveling all over the world and interviewing people at different centers is I want to look for innovative models, for model curricula, for things I haven't thought of before. I've already seen many of those kinds of things in my travels through Europe. So Emory has put an enormous amount of effort and a lot of money into building its AI program. It went on a very dedicated mission to hire faculty, and it hired and is continuing to hire many, many, many faculty across the university in AI. We started a Center for AI Learning. So the very powerful AI effort across the whole university.
Mm-hmm.
So that will absolutely be part of the new center. What will it look like? Not sure yet. Has anybody been using AI really productively in conflict resolution and peace building? Not that I've seen. Maybe they're out there, but I certainly haven't seen everybody. But I have no doubt that that's something that will evolve, and I hope that the center becomes part of that conversation moving forward.
I'm looking forward to the fact, or the opportunity rather, you've named at least 8 to 10 locations that you've been to. So there's at least that many, probably another half dozen or more, where you can invite people from around the world to come here to your center, even if it's for a short period of time, so that people in the United States in general, the greater Atlanta area specifically, that want to come and sit and listen, not worry about agree or disagree, just listen, just sit and understand. And it's not complicated, and you facilitate that. I got to believe that can only lead to human flourishing.
No question. I mean, one of the wonderful things about, I was in 19 cities in Europe, and I interviewed about 30 centers and offices and government offices and people. And every single one, without exception, said, yeah, we'd love to partner with the new center and be part of that network. So there'll be a lot of opportunities to bring people over. I've already, in fact, Gary Mason from Belfast that's already been here. He comes and teaches at Emory. He lives in Belfast. He's been very involved on the trying to reconcile the two sides. So he's already given a talk. It's the first sort of official thing my center did. I called it as sponsored by the Center for Peacebuilding and Conflict Transformation. But I hope to do many, many more of those things moving forward. I think there's a real opportunity here to partner with our indigenous institutions, Carter Center, the King Center, Center for Civil and Human Rights, and all of these incredible centers throughout the world, because the goal here is to bring people together and have them talk in a different way, and have them talk in a way that's open and accepting, and really tries to understand the humanity of the other side, even if we continue to disagree about policies.
Transform conflict. I mean, it's needed, it's timely, and I appreciate you coming on the show to talk about it.
It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Dr. Wolpe. Hey, if you liked that conversation, hit the like button. If you loved it, subscribe. We'll have links to Dr. Wolpe's new center, to his blog, and many other things. Thanks for joining us today, everybody. We'll see you next time.